So it's like December 7th, 2024. And I think I have, at least in part, finally found a way to explain it. I've been watching on and off the P. Diddy material on YouTube, the videos from the victims of P. Diddy, the interview videos. And in many, many ways, I relate. Finally, after literally all of these years, I have heard other victims that I can relate to. And those are the victims of P. Diddy. I am not like most of the victims of P. Diddy. I'm not from that modern era. I'm not cool. I'm not, never have had aspirations to be a rapper. Um, haven't spent a lot of time living in the city. Have never been a corn star or corn actress. Have never partied. Have never had the home or the apartment where the weed was. Have never hung out with celebrities ever. Have never been a go-go dancer or anything. Nothing like that. But I relate to them because in many, many ways, my ex is a lot like P. Diddy. I'm not claiming that he's a huge, famous um, kitty trafficker. He's not a huge, famous kitty trafficker. However, he has been investigated numerous times for SA by numerous victims that were not related to each other, that were not friends of each other, where they couldn't be feeding off of each other's stories because they're unrelated victims. And this includes victims that had no reason to think they were doing it for financial gain. And also victims that did not have a history of those kinds of allegations against other people. And those are important factors because if there's financial gain or they had a history of those kinds of allegations against other people, plus especially if there was something to gain, financial gain, total control, and all the gain of total control over another human being, those types of things are super important because that creates a motive that could bring that victim's testimony into question. But that wasn't the case with these victims. There are police reports about SA on children in at least two different police districts with these unrelated, unconnected victims that had absolutely nothing to gain from those allegations other than a hope to stop the SA against the children. In the larger of the two reports, the district attorney decided that the child victims, there were two of them in that case, were too young to testify. And that's why they dropped the case. Mind you, that the report to me seems really crystal clear that those two boys were very much fit to testify. But in this state, people that SA children or abuse children in any way, particularly if it's a male abuser, and particularly if he has resources, finances, friends in high places, they just let it go anyway. I mean, that's the normal way things work in this state. The other victim was intellectually disabled, and his parent, his mother, became terrified, and it's right there in the reports, and begged the police to stop because she was afraid of retaliation. She was afraid of calling out the abuse that was going on, particularly since her child was mentally um, disabled. And P. Diddy of my state, that's really what he's like P. Diddy in so many ways, would use the fact that she brought these allegations to the police despite the fact that the child that was accusing was not mentally capable of lying, was not intellectually capable of lying, of being cunning, of being crafty, of making it up. And there was evidence. Now, my ex, to the best of my knowledge, has not engaged in huge public freak off parties. And to the best of my knowledge, has not engaged in putting broken bottles into people or putting a how to say it, a D word, into somebody's rectum and to where they need their intestines operated on, things like that. But it truly seems repeatedly, that he gets away with anything. And During the 4 or 5 year state, in air quotes, intervention, meaning aiding and abetting him, ensuring he would be able to continue in whatever way he wanted and profit from it and get praise and adulations from other people for doing it and destroy me for making the mistake of exposing him. My attorney secretary during that time, during those 4 or 5 years, would would oftentimes kind of crack a joke that wasn't really a joke, and she would tell me, "He's paid somebody off. He's paid somebody off." So much like P. Diddy, he just pays them off. He pays them off. I truly believe it. He has friends in high places, political places. He used to boast to me about the friends he had in high places, about the friends he had in law enforcement, in the FBI, and all of these things. He used to tell me the FBI is investigating this and that. That years later, I realized that those alleged infractions that he claimed the FBI was investigating were not the types of infractions the FBI would investigate. If those infractions happened to pretty much anyone else except for a very high ranking politician or something, the FBI would not become involved. And the police wouldn't even take it seriously. Like, you'd have to push the police to write a police report because these infractions were stupid, little stupid stuff. And during the 4 or 5 year state aiding and abetting of him, the state literally held the case open until they could get him through their program, and it took them all of those years to do it. Even though they had evidence of his child abuse, it took them all of those years to get him through it. And the minute the state got him through their program, they immediately returned the children back to him. Whereas with me, I figured out what I was supposed to do. I believe I figured out what I was supposed to do. I was supposed to admit to statements and behaviors and an entire life history that matched up with his false allegations of me and his lies, and in his lies leading to his abuse by proxy against me, meaning he got other people with certain authority to do his bidding. That's abuse by proxy. He had created a whole character, a whole story, a whole life, a whole history, a whole person, behaving and saying things, living a life, all of this That was never me. And I was supposed to confess to statements and behaviors I never did. I was supposed to fess up, confess to a history I never had. And I was supposed to confess to current time lifestyles, statements, and behaviors I was not doing that matched his lies, that matched the character he created and told them was me. And the state made him do a psych eval, and he went first. He went first, and this is important. And then they sent me to the same psychologist, and I went second. And she made statements and she asked questions that didn't make any sense to me at all. Not at all. Like I couldn't make it make sense. I couldn't understand it. And now I do. Because I was supposed to be this character he created in all of his lives. But the thing is, nobody ever told me that. Nobody ever clued me in. And in the last year of the state intervening by aiding and abetting so the abuser would get the children and get everything and completely destroy me, the last psychologist I was made to see, she told this other psychologist that the problem was that I was not being authentic. The problem was that I was not being authentic. Well, of course, she would think that because I wasn't fitting into this character he had created with his lies. My day to day life, my night to night life, my childhood, my whole adult life, all of it, it didn't fit in at all. It was a polar opposite. And I felt on numerous occasions in that last year that I was supposed to do like this big false confession and just tell them that I did and said all of those things, the allegations that I knew about, the ones he used when he did abuse by proxy. I knew what I was accused of when he did the abuse by proxy. Not up front when he started it, but later. Like in 2008, I didn't have a flippin' clue until later, right? But pretty soon later, within, you know, a week or whatever after he did it, after he did that abuse by proxy scam, about a week after I totally knew what the allegations were. But at that time in 2008, he was promising me and swearing and, looking like totally innocent, saying that he didn't do it, that he never said those things. He never said I did and said those things. But later, much, much, much later, years later, I found out that he did. He did. And then in 2012, I didn't have a flippant clue what was going on. He basically moved all of my things into boxes in the garage and put all of my toiletry things under the under the bathroom counter. Like, and then he called the police and he told them that he'd broken up with me months ago and I was failing to accept it, and that I'd come to the house that night to murder my youngest child and him and maybe my other child as well. And then I was going to drive all the way across the whole town and, kill my ex husband and that whole family. And he did this whole skit where he hid in the bathroom with the kids, I found out later, and called the police and, got this whole SWAT team out. And that morning before I went to work, that very, very same morning when I left for work from the house where I was living with him, and we were in the process of doing IVF, and he was paying for part of it. He was paying for part of it. That is not left me months ago. We were going and doing IVF, and he was paying for it, or part of it. And anyway, that morning when I left, he, you know, I went out through the office, which was attached to the garage, and he showed me his computer screen, and he had, all these houses on the computer screen, that had horse property and stuff like that. And he was telling me that he was gonna get one of those houses and we would move there and, then I could have horses and, all of this. And then he was saying that he was thinking it'd be great to, go to Hawaii and do this and that. And then I went to work that very morning. I didn't have like a major argument or anything like didn't have nothing like that happen during the workday. I didn't come home from lunch or anything else. I stayed at my job the whole day. And then that night I drove back, believe after working overtime, which was very typical of me. And I drove back and he had changed the locks. And the only other noteworthy, well, there's other noteworthy things. I mean, for one thing, when I talked to him during the day and that morning, the two, right before I left that morning, he told me, make sure you bring your 357 because I want to take you to the range, to the gun range to shoot it. And I want to shoot it too. We're going to go to the range for your birthday. He said, for your birthday. We're going to go to the range and it'll be a great birthday present. And make sure you bring the 357. I was like, okay, yeah, sure, I'll bring it. And then during the day, when I had a phone call with him, he reminded me to bring the 357. And so I did. I stopped by the condo, I got the 357, and then, after work, and then I drove to the house. And he had changed the locks. I never got in the house that night. And it was so bizarre. And I had this feeling like this sixth sense, like this instinct that something was wrong and I didn't know it was wrong. But it was like this panic feeling like something was wrong and I felt like my kids were in danger. And I felt like maybe something had happened to him, like maybe, he's on the floor, heart attack, unconscious, whatever. That's what I was thinking. Stupid, because if I'd really logicked it out, then I would be, I'd be like, well, he changed the lock, so he's behind it. But in my mind, I guess it just didn't click that he changed the lock situation. And, it was really a key that he put in a lockbox, and um, I knew the code to the lockbox, and maybe in my instinct, I was thinking that it had just gotten broken or something, and I don't know. I mean, if I really would have logicked it out, but I was naive, I was stupid, and I just had this feeling of panic, like something was wrong. And the only other thing that I could say that happened that definitely should have tipped me off is when I pulled up in the driveway, there was this creepy looking guy, long haired guy, and he was in the bushes to the right hand side. And I called my now ex, and I was freaked, and I called him, and he was acting weird. Like, he was acting weird. And oftentimes we would watch this particular TV show together, and I was thinking, I was going to go in like I always did. I never left a weapon in the car because I was always, thought you don't leave weapons in the car because if somebody breaks in the car, then they're going to get the weapon. So he knew that. It was always what I did is I would walk in through the garage. Normally, he'd open the garage, I'd walk in through the garage, or if I did walk in through the door, the weapon would be in a bag. So, the kids weren't exposed to it. They were too young. You don't expose your kids to that. That's how I thought. And then I'd go in his office and we'd basically take it apart. Take the ammo out of it, um, take the cylinder out, and then lock it up in a safe. But anyway, after I'd pulled into that driveway and I called him, he was acting weird. And he was being like, I don't have time to watch anything with you. I don't have time. And he was saying some pretty ugly things that were totally contrary to that morning and the whole day and everything else. Totally contrary. And I did tell him there's this creepy man in the bushes and please open the garage or whatever the heck I said. And, I think he hung up on, I don't know what happened, but I got out of the vehicle and I'm so glad I didn't shoot that, out of, thinking self-defense. I'm so glad I didn't shoot that guy because it turns out later, he told me later in a taped phone call even that, that was the neighbor's son, their, teenage son, 18-year-old son or whatever. And why this dude was standing in the bushes, I have no idea. I have no idea. Maybe my ex had gone over there and filled their heads up with stories during the day, kind of prepping the pump for what he was planning on doing. I would say that's a pretty good guess as to why this kid was standing there in the bushes staring at me like that. That's a crazy thing to do. You don't stand in the bushes staring at a woman who pulls up after work, that you don't just stand there in the bushes just staring. He was really staring at me the whole time. And there wasn't anything going on that he should have been staring like that. And he was like in the bushes, before I turned the car off, staring. And when I saw him, that freaked me out a little bit. And I said, there's a creepy guy in the bushes or creepy man in the bushes. Anyway, moving on. So that was a tip off. But I was naive. I was stupid and naive, to be honest. I mean, I grew up in the country. I was a hick. And I didn't grow up in an environment where people do these kinds of things. It never entered my mind that people do these kinds of things like what he did. So anyway, he had changed the lock and all that. And then, shortly thereafter, the police come, and it's like so many police and basically the whole SWAT team. And after I gave myself up to him, because that's what I did, the report doesn't reflect that, but golly, I mean, if anybody listens to the audio, it's clear. Like they wanted me to jump over the gate, and you couldn't jump over the gate. You had to go, there was a super short wall, like 3.5 feet or whatever it was. And that's always what I did because he always kept the gate locked. So you'd hop over the wall and then you'd open the lockbox, get the key, and open the front door. This is always how it had been. And this little wall was like 3.5 foot. It was short, maybe 4 foot, maybe. But you don't hop over the gate because it was flippy floppy. No, you don't hop over the gate. And I couldn't lock the gate because there was never a key to the lock for the gate. You just got over the wall and then you went in the lockbox, you got the key, you opened the front door, and you walked in. That was always how it was. That was a normal routine for like a year or a year plus. So, one cop was telling me to come her way and hop over the wall. And then when I did that, the other cops were yelling, no, come to the gate and go over the gate, or they're going to shoot me and send the dog after me. And then the other cop would say, no, come here, come here, come here. You can hop over the wall, come here, come here. And I'd start going over there to hop over the wall. Anyway, they finally kicked the gate down, and later I had to pay for it, which was very expensive. And then they had me handcuffed on the sidewalk for a long time. And, when my now ex came out and was, you know, talking to the police and taking him to the back of the property and all this stuff, I was yelling his name and saying, they think I'm Mary. They think I'm Mary. So and so. They think I'm Mary. I had no idea what so flipping ever what was going on. No clue. Let me guarantee you, if I had any thought anywhere in my head, even the remotest thought that I was going to enter that house and do a massacre, I guarantee you I would have known why I was handcuffed on the curb. But I had no flippin' clue because I never said it. I never threatened it. I never thought about it. I never had a fantasy about it. I never had a dream about it, ever. So I was sitting there when he came out saying his name and saying, they think I'm Mary. They think I'm Mary. Please tell them I'm not Mary. Mary's his ex-wife. I really, truly, truly believed that they had gotten me confused with her. And then they had done this. They had grabbed me and handcuffed me and stuff. And anyway, when the SWAT team came, I put the weapon, like in a plant pot or something on the back, and I was sitting there thinking, I've got to also tell him that it's there, or I've got to tell the police that it's there. And, he took him around the back of the house. I had no freaking idea what was going on. And I was going to tell the police if he didn't come to talk to me. And the police, were just screaming and calling me a liar, because the police were saying that they were telling me that he broke up with me months ago and I hadn't accepted it. And, I'd come there to, they didn't say exactly what he lied to them and said, but they were telling me that, we'd, we'd broken up months ago and I wasn't accepting it and we had a big fight and then I came over there. That's what they were screaming at me. And then I kept telling him, that's not true. That's not true. And I was probably still saying, he thinks I'm Mary. And the police were yelling, liar, liar, liar. And I was thinking, I got to find some way to tell them. But anyway, he apparently was watching me at a certain point, so knew that I'd put something down back there. So they found it. And then when I found out they found it, I was really, really relieved because I was like, they're not listening to me. Having a hard time getting to tell them about it. And the reason I left it back there, it wasn't for the reasons people might think. It was just because at that point, the whole place, the whole house was surrounded with the SWAT team and millions, not millions, but lots of cops, like the whole county department of cops. And I was thinking, there is no effing way in hell that I want them to get the impression that I am carrying a weapon to them. That's just what I was thinking. And I was thinking I definitely have to tell that it's there, or if I can retrieve it, then fine. But if I can't retrieve it, I definitely have to tell it was there. But anyway, I was so relieved when they found it. But then they were sitting there thinking that, oh, yes, his lies were true. He told me to bring that. He told me as a birthday gift, we were going to go to the range with his friends, with his FBI friends. He literally went shooting with his FBI friends and would come home with these big paper targets from the range. And he wanted to take me to the range with that particular weapon. That's the one he told me to bring that particular night. And he reminded me that afternoon to go get that weapon and bring it because he was going to take me to the range as a birthday, big birthday gift. And that's why I brought that weapon. That's the only reason I brought that weapon. I would have no use for that weapon otherwise because it's way too frickin' much for general self defense. For general self defense, 9 millimeter or something. But he really, went on and on like that was his favorite weapon. He was like really into that weapon. And so that's why I brought it. So anyway, I got hauled off to jail. And it wasn't until like the next morning or whatever, or later that night, when it was quite a while, that, I got a copy of the paperwork or whatever, because I was going to be brought in to see the judge the next morning. And then I got to see what the allegations were. It was so bizarre. But this is the same person who tried to accuse me of putting a scorpion in the bathtub. It wasn't really a tub, it was a shower. In the shower after work, like a year prior, and purposely having it sting one of my children in the foot, which makes absolutely no sense because I left right after work. I went right to the daycare. I picked up the kids. I drove straight home. And then I was putting the kids, both of them, in that shower, in that same shower stall at the same time. And the younger one, who my ex perpetually used for lies to perpetrate abuse by proxy scams, which I didn't even wake up to until after 2012. And then I started researching it and then I figured it out. But anyway, that particular child, basically stepped on or put his foot up against or on the scorpion and he got stung. But my other child could have gotten stung just as easily. The scorpion was just in the shower stall, period. Could have gotten either child or both of them. And, when my younger child was screaming and the older one, not much older, but just like a year older, was, saying, crab, 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 I, immediately when the screaming started, I knew there was something in there. And so I, yanked the kids, picked them up and took them out. I picked them up and took them out. If I would have left the scorpion in there on purpose, I would have just, slammed whatever kid I wanted to get stung into it a few more times. But no, I yanked them out right away, up, up, so the scorpion couldn't get either one of them out. And then I drove my child who had got stung to the hospital immediately. Immediately. And then my now ex took the child into the hospital, but I immediately called my ex and told him, and I immediately drove to the hospital. That's not what you do when if you're trying to do somebody in, and not to mention the reason the scorpion was in there is because my ex had been so irresponsible with money he scammed out of everybody. I didn't know it at the time that he scammed money out of everybody, but I found that out later. He'd been so irresponsible that the house went into foreclosure. And his cousin had bailed it out of foreclosure a couple times before already within that year. And this time, one of his business partners bailed it out of foreclosure, but said, you're going to sell this house and I'm going to get my money back. So the house was up for sale. So they were emptying out the whole backyard, which was a hoarder's paradise of old newspaper stand boxes, like tons of them back there. And they had moved that and a whole bunch of other crap out of the backyard and moved stuff out of the house as well. And I'm willing to bet that's why the scorpion was in the house, because they had stirred everything up. So the scorpion, it lost its home under whatever it was hiding out in, probably in the yard, maybe in the house though, because they were moving stuff out of there too. Like he had a whole workout room full of equipment he never used, stuff like that. So whatever cubby that scorpion had lived under was gone. So it ended up, I think that's how it ended up in the shower stall. Or it came up through the drain. I understand they could do that. But, when that happened, the scorpion event happened, I hadn't put it together yet. You know, I just thought this was more of his weird, paranoid, delusional thinking that I was starting to figure out. He had some paranoid, delusional thinking, but I didn't understand it. I didn't put two and two together at all. But anyway, circling back. So the last year of the 4 or 5 years of the state aiding and abetting him, giving him privileges I didn't get, like, actual therapy with the kids where they talked, um, more visits with the kids, phone contact with the kids, knowing where the foster family was, contact with the foster family, contact with the kids while in foster care. They didn't give me that. I requested it repeatedly, but they wouldn't give it to me. And the last year, that particular psychologist, I was supposed to confess to being guilty of a whole life that I never lived. And I never did that. I had a feeling and intuition that I was supposed to do that a number of times. And I asked my lawyer, I feel like they need me to fess up to all these things I never did. And unless I do that, they're not going to be satisfied. And he said, don't ever confess to what you didn't do. And he was very strong about that. So I did not do it. But looking back, that was one of my biggest mistakes because I didn't fess up to it. And they weren't able to believe the reality, no matter the fact that the reality was glaring. Like, it was glaring. All the drug tests were negative. I didn't lose employment. I didn't have any DUIs. I didn't go to bars. I didn't pick up men. Nothing. And I was definitely a target, though, for predators. And that's a different video for a different time, but I was a target big time for predators during those years. Because the minute they would find out what I was going through, they were attracted to me like moths to a flame or moths to a light. It was unbelievable. And after that case ended with the state aiding and abetting the abuser, poof, like magic. No more predators. Poof, just like magic. And all these years since, no predators, only predators, my ex, and those he sends over to stalk me. Abuse by proxy, stalking by proxy. Those are the only ones. There are none in my inside circle. There are none scamming their way in. But for a short preview, during the 4 or 5 years of the state aiding and abetting the abuser, I had several of them. I had one that said he had a connection with the state, and he would literally tell me information that was correct. Things that were going on with the case that I didn't know about, and then those things would happen. And so I believed him. So he used that to live on the living room couch of the condo for years for free and have me pay all his bills for him and his two teenage daughters for years. And then he brought a male friend of his in. And, again, the reason I allowed that, and so they would both sleep, but there was a big, like, circular couch, and one would sleep on one end and one would sleep on the other end. And then the two teenage daughters slept in my kids' room. And then I had the master bedroom, but I was frequently out because I was going back and forth up the mountain a lot. But anyway, but yeah, he always had these tips that turned out to be correct. So I just let him stay and I paid all his bills because he said that, if I helped him by helping him keep a roof over his girls' heads and everything, that he would make sure I got my kids back. And then he would give me these tips and they turn out to be accurate. So, and then there was another creeper that a friend of mine, Patricia, brought over. Literally, without my knowledge, she drove this guy up the mountain, 5-hour drive, to help me do work. And this is in the very beginning of the property situation. And he ended up shooting a bunch of drugs in his arm and going ballistic. And there was 2 weeks of him destroying everything on the property, stealing everything, trying to assault me. I had to leave the property because he was trying to grape me and trying to force me to be graped, saying if I didn't allow him to grape me, and very graphic things he was going to do, a lot of things he was going to do, really sick things, then he would tell CPS that I was unfit. And then he started saying that he was going to tell them that I was injecting that stuff in my arms and that I, was the big dealer of that stuff, which I never was, and I never used that stuff. And he was going to tell them that I was unfit, and and so I had to do all of these things he wanted me to do, and I couldn't. I left. And for like 2 weeks, he destroyed everything, stole everything, literally broke windows, tore the roofs apart. He just thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars of damage. And then he was calling Patricia and me and texting thousands of times a day with all of these threats and demands. And then after about 2 weeks, he got burned out and he was ready to leave. And so he was removed and put back in the valley. And then he called back later from Patricia's phone and, wanted to come back and live in the motorhome. And of course, I said no. And then he started threatening again that he was going to call my ex and say all these things. And it turns out he really did do that because during the 4-hour joke of a court hearing after the state aided and abetted my ex, his lawyer brought up that they had heard these things from this person. And so he really did that. But yeah, it was like moths to a flame back then. These predators would just come and just move in and just steal and, you know. But my whole life before that, that did not happen. And my whole life after, it's never happened because that's not my life. But there's more how that caused problems because those people that took advantage, uh, like the second one, the druggie, he literally called my abusive ex and gave him information that was untrue, but still caused problems. And I'm sure he called the state too and things like that. So, anyway,